It's over. HOAs are forcing owners out of their homes. And to add insult to injury, if you live in an HOA and you see the blue tarps up on the roofs, just be aware that that means new roof season is back. Hello friends, welcome back. You're watching Chris Igoe, and full disclosure, most communities that are in Palm Beach County, especially the newer ones, are all built out specifically in HOA communities. And a lot of people are afraid of them, and for good reason. So today we're going to go into a deep dive as to what's happening, why some homeowners associations are forcing out their residents, forcing out owners. And I'm going to tell a horror story that actually happened. Insider information. It happened here in my community a few years ago, but it was horrific. And the HOA forced those owners out. And with cause, right? But there are many instances where that's simply not the case. So we're going to do a deep dive into that. Let's get started right now. And I just left my homeowners association property management office, and I couldn't help but notice that on the calendar behind where the office manager was sitting, there's a prominent sign talking about roof inspections and driveway inspections. And if the homeowners do not comply with those inspections, they're going to find themselves on the other end of a bill. They will be fined. They'll be warned first, but then they'll be fined, which can escalate into a nightmare situation of epic proportions. But make no mistake, in Florida, there are some homeowners associations that have been increasingly aggressive in their enforcement of rules, assessments, and other actions which can pressure homeowners to leave their homes. And the reality is, most of the people that live in this community have the means to stroke the check for whatever the repairs are. But with inflation skyrocketing and despite whatever the most rosy inflation numbers are that are put out recently, I can tell you those numbers are not accurate. They simply don't reflect the reality of what's happening in most people's lives. The cost of living has skyrocketed, and if you have not kept up with inflation in terms of your income, chances are you're feeling financial pain right now. So while I think my market is more insulated than other markets, simply because the people here happen to have more income or more affluence, or whatever you want to use to describe that term, wealth, there's a lot of people who are in financial pain, and stroking a check for a new roof right now is not going to be in the cards for many people. And if you can't comply, then you're in trouble. And it's very similar to the condo situation that I talked about recently and many times in the past. But the difference being, there is a mandatory structural condo assessment that must be done. And if it's not done, that gives the state the right to sell the home, to force people out because the building is not safe. And that's not exactly what's going to happen in residential communities, but if you're in an HOA and you can't stroke the check, you will be in trouble. Now, lots of people who are relocating to Florida that I speak to tend to have a very negative opinion about what HOAs are. They've heard the nightmare stories, and maybe where they're at, HOAs are a disaster. But the reality is the HOA can be a force multiplier if you have a rogue homeowner. If you've got somebody who decides they want to set up and run a meth lab out of their home, you want the ability for the HOA to be able to boot them out. Which takes me to a horror story that actually happened in my community. A number of years ago, there was a family that was experiencing a divorce, and it was a nasty one. And of course, I'm not going to talk about anybody's names because I'm going to preserve their anonymity. But those residents, those homeowners, experienced a terrible divorce, and some of the family members stayed, the others did not. I don't know where they went. It doesn't matter. It's not relevant to the story, but my heart goes out to them. The people who stayed decided that they hated the community, they hated the HOA. And so they would run through the guard gate almost 100% of the time, breaking the car gate that comes down in between each one of the resident entries. And it became a problem. They also refused to pay the HOA fee that was due on a monthly basis. And so the fines racked up. It got really, really nasty between the HOA and the rest of the residents versus these particular homeowners. And it got so bad that these people started to deface their own home. They went as far as writing anti-Semitic slurs all over their house, all over the garage door. And I can promise you, nobody enjoys driving by a neighbor's home that has a swastika on the garage door. And to be clear, this was before the pandemic. This was a while ago. It was before all the things that are happening right now, but it's still hate. It was not well received, and every single interaction with the people who lived there escalated into some form of fight, some form of violence, and the cops were out on a regular basis to police these folks from themselves. And the HOA did what they could to get these people out of the community, up to and including putting a lien against the house and forcing these people out, forcing these people to sell. And while you might think HOAs are bad, and sometimes they are, we're going to go into some of the reasons why, but in this particular instance, it wasn't the HOA that was rogue, it was the homeowner. And the homeowner, who happened to be an attorney, was smart. So, in order to play the game, to kick the can down the road, because he wasn't paying any of the HOA fees, he listed his home for sale with all that hate stuff that I talked about earlier, all the racial slurs and nasty anti-Semitic vulgar language that was, and symbols that were drawn all over the house. With all of that stuff on the house, he listed the home for sale. And because the home was on the market, the HOA did not have the ability to really boot them out. But it became a waiting game, and it was horrific. The neighbors hated it, the HOA hated it, and the residents hated everybody who lived here. And it got more and more aggressive and contentious. And you can't make this stuff up. This really happened. But as a full-time, full-service real estate professional with an all-star team that services all of South Florida, I knew that when they put the home on the market in that condition, radically overpriced, there was 0% chance that this home was going to sell, period. And it didn't. It sat for a very long time because, let's face it, ain't nobody overpaying for a house. And even in the frenzy of what happened after the pandemic, with everybody moving to Florida, none of those buyers were going to pay a premium. And to be clear, this incident happened well before the pandemic and well before the frenzy that happened in Florida. But nobody's overpaying for a home that's in poor condition, and nobody's going to even enter a home that has a swastika drawn on the garage door. And there are 3 reasons why homes don't sell: price, condition, and marketing. But I can promise you, nobody's going to feel welcome or invited or wanting to live in a place where there's so much obvious toxicity upon pulling into the driveway. But eventually, over time, the banks, the financial institutions, the people whom the homeowner owed the money to, eventually forced the sale and got the home into adequate condition. It sold. But these folks wreaked havoc in the community, definitely messed with the neighborhood for a long time, but eventually the HOA and the bank got these people out of the neighborhood. And I wish them well. I hope they got psychiatric treatment. But the truth is, I don't know what happened to them, but I do know that having young kids that live in a community, the last thing anybody wants is someone who lives in the community doing 90 miles an hour within the community and driving recklessly in the community, driving through the guard gate on a regular basis. It's like living with terrorists. But that was then, this is now, and right now, the rising costs and special assessments that many communities, especially those with aging infrastructure, have faced significant increases in costs for maintenance, repairs, and upgrades. And this is partly due to stricter building codes and insurance requirements following recent hurricane and other natural disasters. And the reality is, insurance has skyrocketed. Property insurance is through the roof. And if you've seen any of my videos, I've covered it in the past, but insurance right now in Florida is astronomical. And all of these increased costs, all of these increased costs of living are straining many people out of their HOA. These homeowners may be able to keep up with the 3% interest rate they have, but they might not be able to keep up with the massive increase in all the other costs associated with owning the home. And when we get hit with a hurricane and it destroys half of the community, and that doesn't mean it will destroy half the houses in the community, but if it destroys the landscape or anything that the HOA maintains, everyone in this community will be hit with a massive special assessment. And if you don't have the money to stroke that check, well then the HOA can force you out. And they will, because when you sign the HOA documents, the homeowner association covenants and rules, you're agreeing to everything that's in them. And the reality is HOAs have the right to put a lien against your house and foreclose on you if that's what you signed up for. So make sure you read the HOA documents before you sign them. And if you don't want to be at risk at that because you think you might be in financial jeopardy at some point, then don't sign it. It's not the right community for you. But good luck finding one in my market, because almost every single community that is in South Palm Beach County is in an HOA, unless it's much older. And there's pros and cons in being in both. In a non-HOA community, you can have a boat in your front or backyard, and your neighbor can paint their house green, and your neighbor can also set up a meth lab if they want to, which, by the way, is illegal, and eventually the police will figure it out. But do you really want a meth lab next to your house? I don't. And while I just shared a horror story, the reality is most of the interactions that I've had with my HOA are simply because of violations that are really just a pain in the ass. If you leave your garbage can outside for longer than they allow, you will get a nastygram. If your lawn is not cut or becomes too long because, for example, the lawn guy didn't come on time, you could get hit with the nastygram. And the last thing anybody wants after a full day of work is to come home to a nastygram from the HOA. And if you really want to know how crazy your neighbors and the HOA are, then please volunteer or get elected to be on the HOA board, because I served as treasurer of one for about a month. And I resigned from that as fast as I possibly could. I've never been overwhelmed with more bullshit in my entire life. So a good HOA and the people who run them the right way are 100% doing God's work. They are great people. And most of the HOAs that I have interacted with are well run, they're well maintained, they're well budgeted, they are fiscally guided the right way, and they're a pro, definitely not a con. But they certainly get a bad rap most of the times. But nobody wants a nastygram from the HOA, and they will enforce certain measures. So if you get a violation or warning notice and you don't take action and you don't correct the situation, you will be hit with a fine. And if you don't pay the fine, the HOA has the right to put a lien against your house, and they can force you out of your home. And yes, it's rare, but it happens. And I suspect with all the financial chaos and uncertainty that there is in the economy right now, it's likely going to start happening a heck of a lot more. But I got a phone call from a client recently who relocated from the Pacific Northwest into Palm Beach County, into his dream home and dream lifestyle, and he bought his dream home. And when he signed up and bought the home, the HOA fee was something like $300 a month. And within a year, it was $700. And I can tell you, this particular client is none too happy about this massive HOA rate increase. He's pissed and he wants to move somewhere else where there is no HOA. And in this particular neighborhood, the HOA fees are nominal. The HOA is well run. We've got tremendous amenities and security that are all well worth the fee. But if I got hit with a bill that was 100% higher than last year, I'd be ripping pissed and want to know exactly where that money's going. I would demand to know exactly why there's a massive increase. Because yeah, I know that inflation has skyrocketed, but I also know that there are some bad HOAs out there that are padding their budget. They are doing sweetheart deals with their friends. They are scamming their residents. And to be clear, that is a very rare situation these days, especially in my market, but it happens. There was a community that I lived in many years ago where the HOA hired all types of fraudulent contractors, and they were all inside jobs. They were all sweetheart deals. And when they increased the HOA fee and they hit the community with a massive special assessment, there was almost a war at the HOA meeting. There was literally almost a fist fight, and the police got there. It was a nasty fight, but it became revealed over time that the entire HOA was a corrupt organization that was simply scamming the residents because they could. So it's really important to understand exactly what the neighborhood is that you're moving into, what the subdivision is known for, and work with the professional who understands exactly what goes on in each of these communities. So if you're thinking about buying or selling or relocating anywhere in South Florida, you've got to give me a call, because as a 40+ year resident of South Florida, I know all of these subdivisions like the back of my hand. And if there is a rogue HOA that I know about, then we're going to avoid it, and they'll get the back of my other hand with the pimp slap. But ain't nobody overpaying on my watch, and ain't nobody not finding the one buyer on planet Earth if you must sell. If you found value out of any of my content, please subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and I'll look forward to seeing you on my next video.